Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Canard Boulevard. Today is a Q&A video. I'm going to be answering the questions that have been asked by people like you on the comment section of all my videos. Coming up. The first question is, why don't you paint your beautiful airplanes nice colors? White is boring. Well, there's a very good reason for that, and that's because Burt Rutan, the original designer, said you can have your airplane any color you want as long as it's white. No, that's not the real reason, but he did say that as a paraphrase of Henry Ford in the Model T. However, the reason is because of something called TG, which is the glass transition temperature of fiberglass, which is what these airplanes are made of. In the sun, dark colors such as red or green or black or even blue can absorb so much heat from the sun that will actually cause the fiberglass to reach close or to that TG glass transition temperature, and that will weaken the structure of the airplane. So if you can imagine, if I painted the wings black and I was flying somewhere hot and it had sun beating down on there, the wings could actually fail, and that's bad. So you will see some people that put graphics and things on their planes. They try to do it in non-structural areas. Sometimes I have seen these composite airplanes where they have painted the entire airplane with a non-white color. I would not be buying or flying in that airplane. White rejects the most amount of heat from the sun, and as a result, my airplane is white, with the exception of, you can see some decorative areas on the tips of the canard, the tip of the vertical stabilizer, and some pinstriping on the side. Definitely non-structural areas, areas that are not under any kind of stress whatsoever. The second question I got was about the rudders. They said, how are the rudders interconnected? Because they only go out, and can you push both out at the same time to work like a speed brake? And the answer is A, they're not interconnected, and B, yes, you can. So the left rudder pedal actuates the left rudder, right rudder pedal actuates the right rudder. Those rudders just come out, and when they do, they cause the airplane to yaw. So if I push out the left rudder, it causes drag, which causes yaw, which yaws the airplane like you would expect it to. It's not like a conventional airplane where it has a rudder where it actually steers. These actually cause yaw by causing drag at the end of one wing or the other. And yes, you can push both pedals down, both rudders come out, and you create an equal amount of drag on both, and it works like a speed brake. And I often, in fact, almost always do that when I'm on final, when I'm landing to come in. And on that landing topic, I got another question. Can you slip a canard? Yes, you can. It slips just like any other airplane. I think I have a video of me slipping it. If I do, I'll put it in right here. It does exactly what you would expect it. So basically a slip is when you cross controls. You will give it left aileron and right rudder. And so what the airplane kind of does is it banks this way, but then it turns this way. And so it's kind of flying crooked, crab like this. And because it's flying crooked, it presents the whole side of the airplane, the wind coming in, instead of coming across the front of the airplane in a very streamlined fashion, it's then hitting kind of the side of the airplane, creates a huge amount of drag, slows you down, and causes you to come down faster without building up speed. And that's a real problem with these airplanes because they're so slippery that if you find yourself high on final and you just push the nose down, you're going to be speeding up. And by the time you get down on the ground, you're going to have so much velocity that you're just going to float all the way down the runway. So a way of countering that is by putting it into a slip, which creates a lot more drag. You come down without actually speeding up, and that helps you correct that landing and come in at the correct speeds. Slipping is something that is pretty much done on any airplane. There are some airplanes where it's restricted or it's prohibited with flaps because the flaps in a slip can blanket the horizontal stabilizer, but that's in your POH or your pilot's operating handbook for that airplane. This airplane has no such restrictions. This is a comment that came up on one of my heat videos. Somebody asked, why don't you just put electric heat in? Or somebody said, hey, why don't you just use the oil for the heat instead of using exhaust heat? Well, first I'll answer electric. Electric heat takes immense amount of current. When you're talking about heat it's all about the watts. To get watts, you take the volts, which in this case is 14, and then multiply that by the amps. So if you think about a hair dryer, it's 1400 watts. And how much heat comes out of a hair dryer? Not a huge amount. To get 1400 watts of heat energy in an airplane, you need 100 amps at 14 volts. My alternator only puts out 60 amps, so it couldn't even supply the heater that would put out 1400 watts in this airplane, let alone charge the battery and run the engine and all the other stuff that the alternator has to do. So there simply isn't the electrical capacity to produce enough heat to actually warm the cabin in cold temperatures. And 1400 watts is not a lot of heat when you are way up high and it's minus 20 degrees outside. So that's the main reason why electric heat is not really an option for airplanes. And then somebody said, well, why don't you just use the coolant like a car? Well, it's because it's an air-cooled engine. There is no coolant. But on that topic, then you can maybe use the oil, because the oil gets heated up by the engine. It actually goes through a radiator in the back to cool it. It runs air through that radiator to keep the oil cool. So why not just run the oil into the cockpit and then blow air through that, and then that's your heat? Well, actually, some people do that. And they actually have oil lines that run all the way from the back up to the front to a separate radiator with extra air inlets in the front that they can turn on and off, and they blow air through that. There is a problem with that, however, in that the oil is only about 180, 190 degrees at full operating temperature. That's not really that hot, particularly when you're just trying to blow air and pick up air and heat energy off that oil, because it's all about the delta. Particularly if you're bringing in cold air that's minus 20 degrees outside and then bringing it through a radiator for a fraction of a second, hoping it's going to pick up heat, well, it's not going to pick up much heat. And you're probably going to end up blowing cold air. And the amount of heat energy that's being dumped into the oil that you have to get rid of in order to heat the cabin is just not sufficient. So yes, there are people that do it. It's kind of heavy because you have all this radiator and extra oil lines and extra thermostats. And so it does add weight to the plane, and it's not very efficient. It doesn't produce a lot of heat, particularly when it's very cold. So the reason why most small airplanes use a shroud around the exhaust, just like I put in mine, and I'll put a link to the video that I did mine up here so you can see it, is because that exhaust contains exhaust gases that are 1200, 1300 degrees, very, very hot. Those exhausts are usually glowing red or glowing orange when the engine's running at full power. So all you have to do is put a shroud around like I did, and then blow air through that shroud, and mine's only 10 inches long, and in that 10 inches, it picks up so much heat, so the air coming into the cockpit is hot. It's really hot. So the cockpit gets very warm, and in fact, when I've used it, I've actually had to turn it down because it was too much heat, which is a far cry from the almost zero heat that this airplane was generating when I got it. So I'm really pleased with the exhaust manifold shroud heating system that I put into this airplane. It works really well. Now there is one downside, and that is if you get a crack in your exhaust, it could potentially send exhaust gases into the heating shroud, and then that goes into your cockpit. That's deadly because you have carbon monoxide in those gases, which will kill you. Carbon monoxide is an odorless and colorless gas, and you do not know that you're being impaired by it. That is why I have 2 separate CO detectors in my airplane. So if there ever is a problem with the exhaust heating system and I'm getting CO in the cockpit, hopefully at least one of those CO systems will alert to me that, hey, you've got carbon monoxide in the cockpit, and I can then shut off the heat and ventilate the cabin and then land, obviously. All right, the last question. I have got this question many times, and every time I see it, I think, okay, I'm going to have to explain this. Why can't you hold centerline on takeoff? And if you have a look at my takeoff rules, I'll usually start on centerline, but I'll start drifting off to one side or the other, and eventually I'll just pull it off and, rotate and go flying. But I'm not holding centerline on the runway. there actually is a reason for that. They're like, why can't you hold centerline? Well, I can. If I wanted to, I can, but I don't. And the reason why is because this airplane has a free castering nose wheel. It's not steerable. Like on a Piper Cherokee, you have rudder pedals that are physically linked to the nose wheel, so you can physically steer that wheel. So all you have to do on your takeoff roll in one of those airplanes is just use your feet to keep the airplane centered on the centerline just by steering the nose wheel. This airplane doesn't work that way. The only way this airplane can turn is with differential braking. So I can brake the left side or I can brake the right side, and that's how you steer this airplane. When I'm on a takeoff roll, I don't want to be braking because that's going to slow me down and extend my takeoff roll. And that can then, if I have an engine failure or something, that reduces my safety margin about how soon can I stop and on the remaining runway. So the idea is you want to get up in the air in the shortest amount of runway as fast as you can. And braking on a runway is not the way to do that. If I'm on a takeoff roll and I'm starting to drift off to the left and I can see I'm going to go off the runway, off to the left, for instance, then yes, I'm going to apply a little bit of right brake and bring it back onto the runway. But that said, often I know it's just drifting a little bit and I can just by mental calculation, I can say, well, I'm going to be off. I'm going to be rotating long before I get to the edge of the runway. So I'm not going to brake. I'm just going to let the plane do what it wants. And once I get up to, 50, 60 knots, I can then use the rudders because the rudders have become effective enough that I can actually use the rudders to steer the airplane. And at that point, I don't really care about I'm on centerline because I'm just about to rotate anyway. That said, there are some times when you will see in some of my videos where I am starting on the runway on one corner. I'm nowhere near the center line. I actually have physically steered the airplane to the very edge of the runway and I'm taking off and you can see me going diagonal across the runway. And there's a reason for that as well, because that is when there's a crosswind. So if there's a crosswind coming across the runway, I'm going to have to use some differential braking to compensate for that crosswind. If I have a left crosswind, if I'm taking off on a runway and I've got a wind from the left, and it's going to start blowing me to the right, that means I need to start applying left brake to keep the wind from blowing me off the runway. But that means it's going to slow down my takeoff roll acceleration, which means it's going to extend the length of my takeoff and reduce that safety factor. So when that happens, what I will do is I will start on the right side of the runway and I will aim down to the left. That means I'm facing the airplane more into the crosswind. If I have a crosswind from the left that's starting to blow me to the right, that's all right because I'm already pointed left diagonally across the runway. And I'll just let it push me for a while, and eventually it'll push me and I'll start curving around and to the right again. And if need be, I can add some left brake and correct for that, but usually I don't. And if I have enough of a crosswind where I do, maybe I shouldn't be taking off on that runway anyway. That's the answers to the questions that I keep getting asked over and over again. I hope that makes some sense to you and you learn something educational here. If you have any more questions like this, please leave them in the comment section below. I love answering these types of questions, and I love that you people are interested enough to ask them in the first place. If you do like this kind of video, click like on this one and subscribe to the channel, and you get notified every time I post a new video. I really appreciate when you subscribe to the channel. It helps me out so much. Thanks for watching.